The envelope sat on my desk like a threat. Thick white paper, my name typed across the front in cold, impersonal letters. Not handwritten. Typed. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up, my hands steadier than they should have been. The paper felt expensive between my fingers as I tore it open. Severance package. Effective immediately. Confidentiality agreement. Legal jargon that all meant one thing: I was being fired. Before I could process it, Logan walked in. My co-founder. The man I'd trusted for 5 years. He was smiling, that easy grin that had once meant partnership and now meant something else entirely. "Don't take it personally, Alex," he said, leaning against the doorframe like we were discussing lunch plans instead of my termination. "It's just business. The company needs a new direction." I looked up at him, this man I'd built everything with, and felt something cold settle in my chest. He was firing me from my own company. The software I'd coded. The clients I'd brought in. The late nights and early mornings and every sacrifice in between. Mine. And he was taking it. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just smiled back and said, "I understand." Because somewhere deep down, I knew something he didn't. I'd get it all back one day. 5 years earlier, we'd been two dreamers in a cramped studio apartment that smelled like instant coffee and ambition. Logan had the vision and the words. I had the technical skills and the drive to make things real. He could sell anything to anyone. I could build anything from nothing. Together, we were supposed to be unstoppable. I still remembered the night I'd shown him the first working prototype. 3 months of coding, barely sleeping, surviving on takeout and determination. The software had hummed to life on my laptop screen, and Logan had actually jumped up from the couch. "This is it," he'd said, gripping my shoulders. "This is going to change everything." I'd believed him. We'd registered the company together. Filed the patents with both our names. Brought in our first client through a contact I'd cultivated for months. I'd even come up with the name during a brainstorming session at 2 in the morning. TechFlow. Simple. Perfect. Back then, I hadn't cared about titles or hierarchy. I just wanted to build something that mattered. Something real and lasting that would prove all those people who doubted us wrong. I'd been the architect, the foundation, the engine that made everything run. But somewhere along the way, Logan had started seeing it differently. Somewhere along the way, it became his company. And I'd been too busy building to notice. The shift had been gradual. So subtle I'd missed it until it was too late. We'd been growing fast, bringing in clients, hiring our first employees. The work was overwhelming, and Logan had a solution. "We need structure," he'd said during a meeting in our new office. "We need roles. A clear hierarchy. Investors want to see leadership." It made sense. Every startup reached this point. "You're the tech genius," Logan had continued. "You should focus on what you do best. Product development. Innovation. Let me handle the business side. I'll be CEO, you be CTO." I'd been exhausted from pulling all-nighters to meet deadlines. The idea of having someone else deal with investor pitches and financial projections had sounded like relief. So I'd agreed. We'd sat in a lawyer's office, signing papers I should have read more carefully. Logan had been chatting with the attorney, cracking jokes, while I'd flipped through pages of legal language that made my eyes glaze over. I'd trusted him. That was my first mistake. Because buried in those documents was a clause that gave Logan majority control of the company. 51% to his 49%. A small difference that meant everything. I'd signed away my equal partnership without even realizing it. And by the time I understood what I'd done, it was already too late to take it back. The erasure started small. So small I'd told myself I was being paranoid. I'd walk into conference rooms where strategy meetings were ending. "Oh, we didn't want to bother you," Logan would say. "We know you're busy with the product roadmap." My ideas started appearing in presentation decks with Logan's name in the byline. When I'd mention it, he'd wave it off. "Team effort, you know. We're all contributing." Then came the introduction of new titles in company communications. Logan was always founder and CEO. I was chief technology officer. Never co-founder. Never partner. Just CTO. You're better behind the scenes anyway, Logan had told me once, his hand on my shoulder in a gesture that felt more condescending than friendly. Let me be the face. You be the brains. That's how we work best. My stomach had twisted, but I'd swallowed the discomfort. I'd told myself it didn't matter. That titles were meaningless as long as we were building something great. But it did matter. Because slowly, methodically, Logan was rewriting history. The story of TechFlow was becoming his story. And I was being reduced to a supporting character in my own company. Then everything got worse. He brought her in. And I knew my time was running out. Her name was Vanessa Pierce. Former consultant, sharp suit, sharper heels. Logan had introduced her at a company-wide meeting like she was the answer to prayers I hadn't known we were praying. Vanessa is here to streamline our operations, Logan had announced, his voice filled with enthusiasm I hadn't heard in months. She's going to help us scale efficiently and maximize our potential. She'd smiled at the room, confident and polished. Everything I wasn't. I'd built things. She sold them. And Logan was clearly impressed. Within a week, Vanessa had an office next to Logan's. Within 2 weeks, I was being asked to submit reports for approval on projects I'd been running independently for years. It's just process improvement, Logan had explained when I'd questioned it. Vanessa needs oversight on all departments. That includes tech. But it wasn't all departments. Just mine. Vanessa and Logan started holding strategy sessions without me. They'd closed the door to the conference room, and I'd watch through the glass as they laughed and gestured at whiteboards filled with plans I knew nothing about. My team started coming to me with questions about new directives they'd received. Directives I hadn't approved. Changes to my projects that I hadn't been consulted about. Logan said this is the priority now, they'd explain, looking uncomfortable. The power was shifting. And I was being pushed further and further toward the exit. I found the contract by accident. Late night, empty office, me searching through our shared drive for a technical specification document. I'd clicked into a folder I didn't usually access, and there it was. A PDF labeled Merger Terms, Confidential. My hands had frozen on the mouse. We weren't discussing any merger. At least, I wasn't. I'd opened the document, my heart pounding as I scrolled through page after page of legal language. Logan was negotiating a quiet acquisition with a larger tech firm. The terms were laid out in cold, precise detail. The company would be absorbed. Key personnel would be retained. And there, in Section 12, I'd found my name. Or rather, the absence of it. The incoming board structure listed Logan as Chief Innovation Officer with a substantial equity package. Vanessa was included as VP of Strategy. My name appeared once, in a footnote about potential restructuring of technical leadership. They were planning to cash out. To sell the company I'd built from nothing. And they were going to do it without telling me, leaving me with whatever scraps they deemed appropriate. I'd sat in that empty office for an hour, staring at the screen, feeling everything I'd believed about loyalty and partnership crumble into dust. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't about growth or evolution. This was betrayal. Calculated, deliberate betrayal. And I had no idea how to stop it. The humiliation came 2 weeks later, in front of the entire team. We were in our weekly all-hands meeting. I'd been presenting updates on our latest product release, walking through technical challenges we'd overcome, when Logan had interrupted me. Actually, Alex, I think you're overcomplicating this. His voice had been casual, dismissive. The client doesn't care about back-end architecture. They care about results. I'd paused, surprised. We'd always respected each other's expertise in these settings. I'm explaining the technical foundation that makes those results possible, I'd said carefully. Nobody needs a computer science lecture, Logan had continued, and several people had laughed. Not at a joke. At me. This is why we need to simplify communication. Too much technical jargon, not enough business value. My face had burned. Vanessa had been nodding along, and I'd seen the way my own team members wouldn't meet my eyes. They were embarrassed for me. "Are you done?" I'd asked quietly. Logan had smirked. "We're going in a new direction, Alex. Time to adapt or get left behind." The meeting had ended shortly after, and I'd walked back to my office with my hands shaking. That night, I'd lain awake replaying every moment, every sideways glance, every snicker. I'd built this company. Created the product that made everything possible. And I'd just been treated like an incompetent intern. The envelope came 3 days later. And my old life ended. I packed my things into the same canvas tote bag I'd used on day one. 5 years of my life fit into one bag. A few personal items. A photo of my team from our first successful launch. A coffee mug someone had given me as a joke that said, "I turn coffee into code." Nobody said goodbye. They just watched as I walked through the office, shaking hands with people who wouldn't look at me directly. Logan was in his office with the door closed. Vanessa was nowhere to be seen. I made it to my car before the facade cracked. I sat in the driver's seat, gripping the steering wheel, and screamed. Not words. Just sound. Raw and broken and furious. I screamed until my voice cracked and my throat burned. Then I wiped my eyes, started the engine, and drove. But I didn't go home. I went straight to the one person Logan feared most. The man he'd spent years calling outdated and irrelevant. The founder of our biggest competitor. Charles Ellery. Founder and CEO of Vinex Solutions. He'd tried to buy our company 18 months ago. We'd laughed at his offer, confident in our own trajectory. Logan had called him an antique who didn't understand modern tech. Now I was sitting in Charles's reception area, waiting to be seen. Betting everything on one conversation. When his assistant finally showed me in, Charles looked up from his desk with surprise. "Alex? This is unexpected." I sat down without being invited. "I don't want to sue him," I said. "I want to outsmart him." Charles had listened to my story without interrupting. When I'd finished, he'd leaned back in his leather chair and studied me. "You want revenge," he'd said. "Not a question. A statement." "I want justice," I'd corrected. "There's a difference." He'd smiled slightly. "And what exactly do you think I can do for you?" I'd pulled out the flash drive I'd prepared the night before. Everything I'd managed to download before they'd cut off my access. Technical specifications. Client lists. Market analysis. Not enough to sue, but enough to build something new. "I want a job," I'd said. "Your back-end infrastructure needs work. I can fix it. In exchange, I want resources to build something better than what Logan has." Charles had looked at the flash drive, then back at me. "This sounds like corporate espionage." "This sounds like a very talented engineer looking for new opportunities," I'd replied. "Logan pushed me out of my own company. I'm not going to sit quietly and let him profit from my work." He'd thought about it for a long moment. Then he'd extended his hand. 2-year contract. You rebuild our infrastructure. We provide resources and support. After that, we reassess based on results. I'd shaken his hand, feeling something shift inside me. I wasn't broken anymore. I was dangerous. And Logan had no idea what was coming. The first year was quiet. Deliberately, strategically quiet. I took the contract position at Vinex and worked like someone with nothing to lose. Because I didn't. I rebuilt their entire back-end system from the ground up. Streamlined their processes. Fixed problems they didn't even know they had. During the day, I was just another contractor. Competent but unremarkable. But at night, while everyone else slept, I worked on my real project. I mapped every weakness in TechFlow. Every technical debt I'd warned Logan about but he'd ignored. Every shortcut we'd taken to meet deadlines. Every fragile connection in the architecture that could break under pressure. I knew that system better than anyone because I'd built it. And now I was going to use that knowledge to dismantle everything Logan had taken from me. I also started paying attention to industry gossip. TechFlow was struggling. The word came through back channels, former colleagues who'd messaged me privately. Morale was terrible. The culture I'd worked so hard to build had rotted under Logan's leadership. People were leaving. Good people. The kind of talent you couldn't easily replace. I kept a list of everyone who'd left. Their names. Their skills. Their contact information. I didn't reach out yet. But I was preparing. Building my team before they even knew they'd be part of one. Patience. That was the key. Logan had acted impulsively, emotionally. I would be methodical. And that would make all the difference. By month 15, the exodus had accelerated. 3 senior developers gone in 1 quarter. The lead designer who'd been with us since the beginning. Even some of Logan's early hires were jumping ship. I started quietly reaching out. Coffee meetings that seemed casual but weren't. How's life after TechFlow? I'd ask. And they'd tell me everything. The impossible deadlines. The shifting priorities. Logan's increasing paranoia and micromanagement. Vanessa's tendency to promise clients features that couldn't be built. It's a disaster, one former senior engineer told me over coffee. Logan has no idea how to actually run a tech company. He just knows how to talk about it. What would it take to get you back? I'd asked carefully. Not to TechFlow. But to work together again on something new. His eyes had lit up. You're building something? Maybe, I'd said. Would you be interested? By month 18, I had commitments from 12 former TechFlow employees. The core team that had made everything work. People who'd trusted me once and were willing to trust me again. People who'd been as hurt by Logan's betrayal as I had been. We met in small groups, careful to avoid detection. I laid out my vision. Better technology. Better culture. Better leadership. When? They kept asking. Soon, I'd promise. Very soon. Then Vanessa called me. And everything accelerated faster than I'd planned. He's crashing the ship. Those were her first words when I answered the phone. I'd hesitated, genuinely surprised. Vanessa had been Logan's golden child. His right hand. Why was she calling me? Vanessa? I'd said carefully. What are you talking about? Logan. He's going to destroy TechFlow, and I'm not going down with it. She'd sounded tired. Frustrated. I need to talk to you. In person. We'd met at a coffee shop across town. Vanessa had looked different. Less polished. More human. She'd sat down and immediately started talking. I know what you must think of me, she'd begun. But I didn't know about the merger plans until recently. I didn't know he was pushing you out like that. But you helped him do it, I'd said coldly. She'd nodded. I did. Because I believed in his vision. But he doesn't have one. He's just making it up as he goes, burning bridges, alienating clients. The company is hemorrhaging money. Why tell me this? She'd pulled out a folder. Because I have documentation. Proof that Logan has been falsifying financial numbers to keep investors happy. Inflated user metrics. Fake revenue projections. He's committing fraud. I'd taken the folder, my pulse quickening. What do you want in return? A job, she'd said simply. At double my current salary. And total silence about where I went. I'd thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. Done. Vanessa had smiled. Then let's take him down. The shell company was Charles's idea. You need distance, he'd explained. If Logan figures out you're behind this, he'll lawyer up and make everything harder. So we'd created Aurora Ventures. A faceless LLC with no obvious connections to me or Vinex. Clean. Invisible. Neutral. Aurora Ventures began acquiring small partner firms that TechFlow relied on. Data providers. API services. Cloud infrastructure partners. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that would raise immediate alarms. Just quiet acquisitions of companies that happened to be critical to TechFlow's operations. By month 20, Aurora Ventures controlled 60% of TechFlow's supplier pipeline. And Logan still had no idea. Then we started tightening the screws. A price increase here. A delayed service update there. Nothing illegal. Nothing actionable. Just enough friction to make everything harder. TechFlow's production slowed. Features that should have taken weeks were taking months. Client complaints started piling up. Logan blamed his tech team. Fired 2 people who'd been loyal to him. The team that remained was terrified and demoralized. He thinks it's internal sabotage, Vanessa reported during one of our weekly calls. She was still working at TechFlow, feeding me information. He's becoming paranoid. Starting to suspect everyone. Good, I'd said. Keep him focused on the wrong enemy. Because while Logan was looking for betrayal inside his company, I was building the weapon that would destroy him from the outside. And he wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. The beta launch happened on a Tuesday morning. VineX announced FlowStream, our new platform. Cleaner interface. Faster processing. Better security. And 30% cheaper than TechFlow's premium tier. The tech blogs picked it up immediately. VineX's surprise comeback, and has TechFlow finally met its match? The comparisons were brutal and immediate. Everything TechFlow did, FlowStream did better. And none of it was stolen. It was just superior engineering. Built from scratch using everything I'd learned from 5 years of mistakes and victories. Charles had given me full creative control, and I delivered something I was genuinely proud of. Client inquiries flooded in within hours. Companies that had been considering TechFlow suddenly had a better option. Companies already using TechFlow started asking about migration paths. I'd monitored TechFlow's emergency meetings through Vanessa. Logan had been panicking. Screaming at his remaining engineers to figure out how they did it. Demanding they copy features from FlowStream. It's chaos, Vanessa had reported. He's melting down. 2 weeks later, Logan did exactly what I'd predicted. He reached out to Charles about a potential partnership. About maybe working together instead of competing. Charles had called me immediately. He wants to meet. What do you want me to do? I'd smiled. Tell him you'll think about it. Schedule a meeting for next month. And let's prepare the buyout terms. Because Logan's board was losing faith. And we were about to give them a solution. Charles had played his role perfectly. The meeting with Logan had been cordial, professional. Logan had pitched collaboration. Charles had listened thoughtfully. Your technology is impressive, Charles had said, which was true. Because I'd built it. But I'm concerned about your company's direction. Logan had tried to spin the narrative. Talked about growth opportunities and market positioning. But Charles had been blunt. Your investors are nervous. Your client retention is dropping. Your team morale is low. These are serious problems. We're addressing them, Logan had insisted. Charles had leaned forward. Then let me help you address them. I'm prepared to offer a full acquisition. Fair terms. Your team keeps their jobs. Your investors get their returns. Logan's face had gone pale. You want to buy TechFlow? I want to save it, Charles had corrected. Before you run it completely into the ground. Logan had left that meeting shaken. Over the next week, 3 of his 5 board members reached out to Charles privately. They'd seen the numbers. They knew TechFlow was struggling. And they wanted out before things got worse. Charles had made his formal offer on a Thursday. Full acquisition at slightly below market value, with the caveat that Logan would step down as CEO immediately. The board has lost confidence in your leadership, Charles had explained during the call. This is the best deal you're going to get. Logan had tried to fight. Had threatened lawsuits and investigations. But his own investors had turned on him. They wanted the deal. They wanted their money. And they wanted Logan gone. The acquisition was announced 3 weeks later. Press releases went out. TechFlow would become part of the VineX family. Current employees would be retained. Leadership would transition. Logan would step down effective immediately. The board meeting to finalize everything was scheduled for Monday morning. I'd driven to the office early, my heart pounding with anticipation. Charles had texted me. "Ready?" "Ready," I'd replied. When Logan walked into the conference room, he'd been expecting the board. His lawyers. Maybe some Vinex executives he'd never met. Instead, he saw me. Sitting across the table. Wearing a suit I'd bought specifically for this moment. Next to Charles, who was smiling. His face had gone white. "What is this?" Logan had stammered. "Hello, Logan," I'd said calmly. "Long time no see." He'd looked around the room wildly. At his board members, who wouldn't meet his eyes. At Charles, who was organizing papers. At me, the person he'd thrown away. "You're kidding me," he'd whispered. You're behind this?" I'd smiled. The same smile I'd given him the day he'd fired me. "Didn't see that coming, did you?" Charles had gestured to the empty chair. "Sit down, Logan. Let's walk through the transition plan. Step by step." Logan had tried everything. Threats. Appeals to old friendship. Legal challenges. But every door was already closed. His lawyers had reviewed the acquisition terms and confirmed everything was legal. His investors had already signed off. His board had voted to remove him. "This is theft," Logan had hissed, leaning across the table. "I built this company." "No," I'd corrected calmly. "I built this company. You just took credit for it." He'd tried to invoke his exit package. The golden parachute he'd negotiated years ago. Millions of dollars for stepping down. But Vanessa had provided documentation of his financial fraud. The falsified metrics. The inflated projections. The lies he'd told to keep investors happy. Section 7.3, Charles had said, sliding papers across the table. Any exit compensation is void if the departing executive is found to have committed fraud or material misrepresentation. Logan's face had crumbled. "You can't prove that." "Actually," Vanessa had said, walking into the conference room with a box of documents, "I can." She'd placed the box in front of the board. 3 years of falsified reports. Emails showing deliberate deception. Even recordings of Logan instructing me to manipulate numbers. Logan had stared at her like she'd stabbed him. "You're supposed to be on my side." "I was," Vanessa had said. "Until I realized you were going to drag me down with you." The vote was unanimous. Logan would leave with nothing. Not even a LinkedIn recommendation. He'd walked out of that boardroom a broken man. And I'd felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Walking through the TechFlow office as its new chief innovation officer felt surreal. The space looked the same. Same desks, same conference rooms, same coffee machine that never worked properly. But everything had changed. I'd spent the first week meeting with remaining employees. Some were wary. I'd been gone for 2 years. Some were relieved. They'd heard I was taking over. A few had already quit when they'd heard Logan was out. They were the ones who'd laughed when he'd humiliated me. I didn't try to convince them to stay. I brought back the people who mattered. The 12 who'd committed to working with me again. Engineers who understood the code base. Designers who knew the product vision. Team members who'd been there from the beginning. "Welcome home," I'd told them as they walked back into the office. "Let's fix this place." We'd worked systematically. Addressed the technical debt Logan had ignored. Fixed the architectural problems I'd warned about years ago. Rebuilt relationships with clients who'd been frustrated by poor service. Within 3 months, the culture had transformed. People started smiling again. Innovation happened naturally. The product improved in ways that actually mattered. Then I'd heard through the industry grapevine that Logan was trying to start something new. Trying to raise venture funding for a revolutionary new platform. I'd smiled when Charles had told me. "Let him try," I'd said. Charles had handled it quietly. No public announcements. No dramatic confrontations. Just a few strategic conversations with the right people. Investors Logan was pitching to would get a call. Just thought you should know about some concerns regarding his previous venture. Board members at firms considering partnerships would receive friendly warnings. Might want to do thorough due diligence on this one. Word spread through the startup ecosystem the way it always does. Whispers and warnings. Red flags and cautionary tales. Logan found himself shut out of meetings. Disinvited from pitch competitions. Removed from consideration for accelerator programs. It wasn't a dramatic blacklist. It was something more subtle and more devastating. His reputation had simply evaporated. The man who'd once been celebrated as a visionary founder was now seen as someone who couldn't be trusted. Someone who'd committed fraud. Someone who destroyed his own company through arrogance and incompetence. He's consulting now, Vanessa had mentioned during a project meeting. Advising early-stage startups on growth strategy. The irony was perfect. Logan, who'd driven TechFlow into the ground, was giving other people advice on how to succeed. Think he learned anything? I'd asked. Vanessa had laughed. People like Logan never learn. They just find new victims. I'd decided then that I was done thinking about him. Logan had taken up enough space in my head. It was time to focus on building something better instead of dwelling on what he destroyed. A tech journalist had requested an interview about Vinex's acquisition and turnaround of TechFlow. I'd almost declined. I didn't want to rehash the story publicly. But Charles had convinced me. People need to hear this. Not as revenge, but as a case study in resilience. So I'd agreed. We'd met at a coffee shop, and the journalist, a woman named Taylor, had been direct. There's been speculation about the circumstances of your departure from TechFlow, she'd said. And your role in the acquisition. Can you address that? I'd chosen my words carefully. I was a co-founder who got pushed out. It happens more often than people think. The difference is what you do afterward. Which was? Build something better. Prove that the original success wasn't about one person's charisma. It was about real innovation and solid engineering. She'd asked about Logan specifically. What I thought of his leadership. What had gone wrong. Some people mistake ego for leadership, I'd said. They believe their own press and forget that companies are built by teams, not individuals. The article had published 2 weeks later. TechFlow's Phoenix, how one engineer reclaimed her company, had gone viral. Shared across LinkedIn. Discussed in startup forums. Analyzed in business school case studies. The comments section had been brutal toward Logan. People who'd worked with him shared their own stories. His reputation, already damaged, was completely shredded. I'd read through some of the comments but stopped halfway. This wasn't about destroying Logan. It was about rebuilding what he'd nearly destroyed. 2 years after Logan had fired me, an envelope arrived at my office. No return address. Just my name written in handwriting I recognized immediately. Logan's. Inside was a single card. One sentence written in his distinctive scrawl. Was it worth it? I'd stared at that card for a long time. Was it worth it? Worth the 2 years of grinding work, rebuilding from nothing, proving myself all over again? Worth the stress and the doubt and the nights when I'd wondered if I was delusional to think I could win? Worth the relationships that had been damaged and the trust that had been broken? I'd thought about the company we'd built together. The dreams we'd shared in that cramped apartment. The moment when everything had felt possible and pure. Then I'd thought about what I'd learned. That partnerships require mutual respect, not just shared goals. That building something meaningful takes more than charisma and vision. That when someone shows you who they really are, you should believe them. I'd walked to the shredder in the corner of my office. Fed Logan's card through the machine. Watched it turn into confetti. Then I'd sat back down at my desk and returned to work. Building. Creating. Leading. The way I should have been allowed to do from the beginning. No, I hadn't replied to Logan's question. Because he wouldn't have understood the answer anyway. Flowstream continued to grow. Within 18 months of the acquisition, we'd doubled TechFlow's previous user base. Expanded into markets Logan had never thought to pursue. Built features that solved real problems instead of chasing trends. I'd promoted 3 people from within to senior leadership positions. People who'd been overlooked under Logan's regime because they'd been doers instead of talkers. The culture I'd worked so hard to create in the early days had returned. Stronger now. More mature. My team started winning industry awards. Recognition for innovation, for workplace culture, for technical excellence. Each one felt like vindication. Not because I needed to prove anything to Logan anymore, but because I needed to prove it to myself. That I'd been right. That the company I'd envisioned was possible. That leadership wasn't about ego or control but about empowering talented people to do their best work. Charles had been invaluable. Not as a boss, but as a mentor. He'd given me autonomy while offering guidance when I'd needed it. You know what the best part of this whole story is? He'd asked during a quarterly review meeting. What? You didn't win because you were angry. You won because you were better. That had stayed with me. Because it was true. I hadn't destroyed Logan through sabotage or revenge. I'd simply built something superior and let the market decide. I ran into someone from Logan's new venture at a tech conference. A young developer who'd joined his consulting firm, starry-eyed and eager. You used to work with Logan, right? She'd asked when she'd recognized me. How was he as a leader? I'd considered my answer carefully. I could have told her everything. About the betrayal and the fraud and the systematic destruction of everything good. But she'd find out on her own soon enough. People like Logan always revealed themselves eventually. He's very good at selling a vision, I'd said. Just make sure you protect yourself legally. Read every contract. Keep documentation of everything. She'd looked confused. That seems overly cautious. Maybe, I'd agreed. But I'd rather be cautious than regretful. She'd thanked me and walked away, and I'd wondered if she'd remember that conversation later. If she'd wish she'd listened more carefully. But that wasn't my responsibility anymore. I'd spent 2 years fighting to reclaim what was mine. Now it was time to focus on building something new. Something that would outlast any one person's ego or ambition. The conference keynote that afternoon had been about legacy. About what we leave behind in the tech industry. I'd listened from the back of the auditorium and thought about my own legacy. Not the company I'd built or the revenge I'd gotten. But the people I'd helped. The culture I'd created. The standard I'd set for how leaders should treat the people who trust them. 3 years after everything had fallen apart, TechFlow was unrecognizable from the company Logan had nearly destroyed. We'd expanded to 5 cities. Hired 300 people. Developed 3 new product lines that were changing how businesses operated. And through it all, I'd made sure everyone knew the truth. That companies are built by teams, not individuals. That innovation comes from collaboration, not control. That real leadership means empowering others, not diminishing them. I'd been invited to speak at a startup founder conference. The topic was building sustainable companies. I'd almost declined, still uncomfortable with public speaking. But something had made me accept. Standing on that stage, looking at hundreds of young founders with their dreams and their naivety, I'd felt a responsibility to tell them the truth. Most advice you'll get will be about growth hacking and fundraising and pitch decks, I'd begun. But I want to talk about something more important. How to treat your co-founders and early employees. I'd shared my story. Not as a revenge tale, but as a cautionary one. About the importance of legal protection. About reading every document. About trusting your instincts when something feels wrong. The person who seems like your perfect partner might be planning to push you out, I'd said. Protect yourself legally. But also protect yourself emotionally. Don't let anyone make you question your own value. The standing ovation afterward had lasted 3 minutes. And the messages that had poured in over the following weeks had all said the same thing. Thank you for telling the truth. I kept one photo from the early days on my desk. Not prominently displayed, but tucked in a drawer I'd open occasionally. Me and Logan in that cramped apartment, grinning at the camera, the first working prototype glowing on the laptop screen between us. I'd look at it sometimes and try to remember what I'd felt in that moment. The pure excitement. The genuine partnership. The belief that we were building something together. That version of Logan might have been real once. Before the success and the ego and the hunger for control had corrupted something that could have been great. Or maybe that version had never existed. Maybe I'd just been seeing what I'd wanted to see. Either way, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was what I'd built afterward. A company where people felt valued. Where innovation came from collaboration. Where success was measured not just in profits but in the lives we'd improved and the standards we'd set. Logan had pushed me out of the company I'd helped build. And in doing so, he'd given me the greatest gift possible. The chance to prove I didn't need him. That the talent and the vision and the drive had been mine all along. He'd thought he was taking everything from me. Instead, he'd freed me to become everything I was meant to be. The loudest revenge isn't a call-out post or a public confrontation. It's building something better. It's succeeding so completely that the person who tried to destroy you becomes irrelevant. It's proving that your value wasn't dependent on their validation. Sometimes the best way to win isn't to fight. It's to simply outlast, outwork, and outbuild the person who underestimated you. I closed the drawer with the old photo and returned to my computer. There were products to launch. Teams to lead. A legacy to build. Logan was somewhere in the past, still trying to figure out what had gone wrong. I was in the present, building the future. And that made all the difference.